Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Deerassic at Home. Today we are talking about antler scoring, and I've got a white-tailed deer deadhead right here with the skull and the rack right here, and this is what we're going to be working with today. Now today's lesson's kind of geared towards a little bit older kids, maybe 4th, 5th grade on up into middle school, high school, but this is one of those lessons that can be great for the whole family, for the younger kids, for, like I said, those little bit older kids, for adults. Everybody can join in and have a lot of fun with this. But biggest thing is if you got a deer hanging on the wall, whatever, you find one out in the woods. The big thing, if you find one out in the woods, you have to have a permit for that. You can't just pick one up and just take it. Because we are an education center, we are able to collect these with our education permit that we have for our nature center, and we can use these for our scoring classes, anything educational to teach youth and adults about deer antlers. So that is where I got this from. But anyways, so why do we score deer antlers? Why do we score any game animal? So each game animal, whether it's a deer, turkey, bear, moose, elk, whatever it is, all have their own scoring systems. And the way that works is it ranks each animal that is harvested. Because more specifically for deer, you can't just tell how big it is when somebody says, oh, I shot this 8-point, I shot this 10-point, I shot this 9-point, whatever it is. Because you can have, little 10 points, and you can have great big 8 points. It doesn't really tell you a whole lot about the size of the deer. So the scoring system is going to measure different things about the rack that can give you a much better idea as to how big the rack is. But today I've got this guy here. He's a basic 9-point. It's got this little guy here that makes him a 9 instead of a mainframe 8. And he's probably going to score in the teens, the 115 to 120 area, give or take. But we'll get to that a little bit later. So a couple other things about scoring systems, how to score deer antlers. There's several different scoring systems that you can use. Today we are going to use the Buckmaster scoring system. It's the easiest to teach. It's the easiest to work with. There are no deductions. We'll talk about that here a little bit later. But I'm going to have you guys follow along right on this score sheet with me. I'm going to show you how we're going to score this rack here, and then you guys can try it at home. So there's a couple things that you're going to need to score deer antlers. One, you're going to need a set of antlers. Now you can do that with just a regular shed antler. Once you find where the deer has shed it, and you can pick those up and keep those legally. Like I said before, the deadheads, you have to get a permit for that just to prove that you didn't poach the animal. But obviously you need the rack to be able to score it. You're going to need paper and a pen or pencil. You can use one of these score sheets. You can find them on Buckmaster's website. You can find Boone & Crockett's, Pope & Young's, all on their websites. You can find a white-tailed deer scoring sheet pretty easy on the internet, print it off. Or you can just use a sheet of paper. Then you're going to need a tape measure. So I got this nice flexible one here, works really well. It just has the 1/8 marks on it, which is going to be really, really helpful. And we'll get to that here in a second. I've got this cable, this scoring cable. It's really, really nice for doing the main beams. And I've got this alligator clip that's going to help us later. And I'm going to explain that here in just a minute as well. So the first thing we need to determine is the right and left sides. Okay, the way you tell on a deer, whether it's the right or the left, what you're scoring, because it's all going to depend on your score sheet here, is you got to pretend that you are the deer. So if I'm the deer looking at you guys, this is going to be the right and this is going to be the left. So if you guys were looking at it, then you've got your right here and your left here. Okay, there's 4 basic measurements that we need to take to determine the final score for this particular deer. The first one is the inside spread. Okay, so we're figuring out the spread of the antlers. The next measurement we're going to do is the length of the main beams, and that's on both sides. So it's taken at the lowest place on the burr, which is this fat kind of flared out part here on the bottom. The lowest place on it all the way the outside edge on the center line, all the way out to the very tip. Okay, and then we do the same thing all the way out to the tip on the end of that main beam on both sides. The third thing we're going to do is we're going to take the length of each point. But you've got these points which are called your brow tines. Okay, that's always these two here in the middle on each side. So you got your brow tines, you take the length of those. Then you take the length, that would be your P2 or G2, P3 or G3 right there. You never take the measurement of this last point here because that got included in the length of your main beam. Okay, and then we do the same thing over here. The second point, this third one, and this one's actually got a fourth point on this side. And then remember, we don't do the length of the outside one there. And then the final thing that we're going to do is we're going to take circumference measurements. Now, does anybody know what circumference means? So circumference is how big around something is. Okay, so it's the measurement of how big around something is. So no matter how many points a deer rack has, you always take 4 circumference measurements on each side. Okay, and it's always the smallest place around the main beams, and the first one's in between this burr here and the first point. So I'd take my measurement in between these two at the smallest place. Then between this first point and the second point, so the smallest place in between here. Then we would take the smallest place in between the second and third to get our third circumference measurement. So I'd wrap this tape measure around there, okay, the smallest place. And then normally what you do is you'd have 1, 2, 3, and then your fourth one would be go in between your third point and your fourth point if you have a fourth point. So it would be in between here on this side. Because we do not have a fourth point over here, it's just the end of the main beam. What we do is we actually measure this main beam from the center of this third point all the way out to the end. Okay, and just for an easy measurement, let's say that's 8 inches. Okay, we would then divide that by 2. So 8 divided by 2, which is what? That would be 4. So we'd take from there 4 inches, which is going to be somewhere right in here, and then we'd take our circumference measurement right there. All right, and the last thing we need to know before we get started is when you score deer antlers, everything gets recorded in eighths. So you need to know how to read a tape measure. And if you've got a tape measure that just has the eighth marks, it's going to make it a lot easier like this one. But if not, I've got this little diagram here. It shows you what the eighth marks is, how to convert things into eighths. But everything needs to be in eighths. That way when you get all your measurements down, it makes it super simple. Everything's already converted into eighths, and it makes it a lot easier adding everything up at the end. Now that we have everything that we need to do to measure this rack, we're going to go ahead and start. And you guys are going to follow along right here on my score sheet with me. So we are going to do the inside spread first. I am going to hold it to where you guys can see it a little bit better. But I'm going to hold this. I'm going to pull my tape measure tight. And basically all I'm going to do is go back and forth here to try and find the widest place. So I want the widest place in between these main beams, okay? Because remember the inside spread is the widest part in between the main beams here, perpendicular to that center line of the skull. So that's what we need for our first measurement, okay? So for the inside spread, we have 17 and 0/8. If you have it where it lands right on the inch mark, still put 0/8. That way you know when you add everything up at the end, there wasn't any eighths with that, and it makes it a little bit easier for your addition at the end. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do all of one side of the rack at once and then all the other side. And usually what score sheets do is it does the right antler first and then the left antler. So we're going to start with the right antler, which would be this side right here. Okay, and I'm going to have to turn this to where I can see it and lay the rack down here. And this is the best way to do it. That's why these Dead heads are the easiest to work with. You can lay them on a table right like that. Now I can measure this with my tape measure, or this is where this cable comes in handy really, really well on doing the main beam, since there's so much curvature to the antlers right there. But remember, looking at that side, we want from the lowest place on the burr, which is this fat part at the bottom of the antler, all the way out on the outside of that main beam, all the way out to the very tip here. Okay, so I'm going to take that on this side right here. I'm going to use my cable here, and I'm just going to wrap it all the way around this outside here. And once I get to the end there, I'm going to take my alligator clip and take this cable here and take my tape measure and measure that all the way out. Pull it tight, and I've got 19 0/8. 19 0/8, and I'd put it in that box right there. Okay, now we're going to do the length of our points, and all we need is our tape measure here. So I'll kind of hold this to where you guys can see it a little bit better, but I would take on these brow tines, this first point here, usually you're going to do it on the front side. Okay, so you're going to do it on the front side, and what you want to do is you want to create an imaginary line on the top of that main beam there. Okay, and that's where you're going to start your measurement from. So I can actually lay this tape measure on the top of the main beam there, and I could actually draw a line if I wanted to right there, and that's where I would start my measurement from and go up like that. Okay, so I'm going to take that measurement, and then I can actually take that tape measure and kind of wrap it over top that point. And I got 4 4/8 for that length of the first brow tine point, first point, 4 4/8. Okay. Then I'm going to take the length of the second point. So that's right here. Again, you're going to take your tape measure and you can kind of lay it on the top. Trying to get it to where you guys can see that. You lay it on the top of that main beam, and then I could draw my line right here, and that's where I'd start to measure up from on the point. And I'm messing up the nice little runner here my wife has. She'll probably be mad at me. So I'm going to measure that, and I got 6 5/8 for that. Okay, 6 5/8, and you guys can follow along, and you can be writing these down and making your own little columns there, and see if you guys can do the math. I'm going to go ahead and do the third point here, so I'm going to do the same thing. Run my tape measure on the top of the main beam there, get my baseline for my point, measure to the top, and I got 5 1/8 for that third point. Okay, now remember, we're not recording this last point. It counts as the number of points, which makes this a 9 point, but as far as measuring it, we already measured that into our main beam length. Okay, so now we're going to do our circumference measurements. So the first one is in between this burr and the first point here. Smallest place for circumference. So I'm going to wrap this tape measure around there as tight as I can and try and find the smallest place. And I got 4 1/8 for that first circumference measurement. Now I'm looking at that second one. I'm going to wrap it around there for that second one and try and find the smallest place there. And I got 3 3/8 for this third one in between our second and third points. Okay. I'm going to wrap this tape measure around there. Okay, and I got 3 1/8 for that one. Now remember, this one doesn't have a fourth point, so we got to take our measurement from the middle of this third point here all the way out to the end. And actually it's pretty much at 8 inches, which was what I used as an example earlier. And at my 4-inch mark, which is right there, I'm going to take my circumference measurement, and it is 2 2/8. Okay, 2 2/8 for that 4th circumference measurement. So now we have all our measurements done for this right antler. And now we're going to do the exact same thing on this left side. Okay, and I'm going to kind of fast forward through this part. Okay, so for our lengths for the left side, we got 19 0/8 for the length of the main beam. We got 5 1/8 for the length of the first brow tine or brow point. We got 6 6/8 for the length of the second point. 5 1/8 for the length of the third point. And then really quickly about this fourth point, to use it as an example, you can see it a little bit better there, kind of silhouetted on my shirt there. But we only score points that are at least 1 inch long. Okay, so the wives' tale that, oh, you know, your grandpa might have told you if you can hang a ring on it, you can score it and it counts as a point. Not true. Has to be at least 1 inch long to be counted as a point and get measured as a point. So this one actually barely breaks it over the mark and is exactly 1 inch. So this is 1 0/8. 1 0/8. And then for the circumference measurements, we got 4 1/8 for the first one, 3 3/8 for the second circumference measurement, 3 0/8 for the third, and for the fourth and final one, since we can go in between the third and fourth point, we got 2 5/8. All right, so now we have to add each side up, okay? And like I said, having everything in eighths is going to make this a lot easier. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is add all of your eighths together. So obviously, adding all eighths together, our bottom number is going to be 8. Okay, now we need to add all of our top numbers, our numerators together, and we're going to add those together now. So you get 0 plus 4 is 4, 4 plus 5 is 9, 9 plus 1 is 10, 10 plus 1 is 11, 11 plus 3 is 14, 14 plus 1 is 15, and 15 plus 2 is 17. So we would have 17 eighths right here, but I'm not going to write it just yet. Okay, that's an improper fraction. So how do we convert that to a proper fraction? Okay, how many times does 8 go into 17? 2 goes into it twice. So we're going to put 2 up here, just as a little side note, above our 19 up here. I know it's kind of hard to see. So how much do we have left over? 8 goes into 17 twice. 8 times 2 is 16. 17 minus 16 is 1, so we have 1 left over. So we've got 1/8. So it would be 2 1/8 is our proper fraction. Make sense? So now we're going to take all of our whole numbers and add those together. So we've got 2 plus 19 is 21. 21 plus 4 is 25. 25 plus 6 is 31. 31 plus 5 is 36. 36 plus 4 is 40. 40 plus 3 is 43. 43 plus 3 is 46. And 46 plus 2 is 48. So we have, for this entire right antler, 48 1/8. Now we're going to do the same thing for this next side, but I want you guys to see if you can figure it out on your own. So you can pause the video, try and add these up on your own, do the eighths first, convert to a proper fraction, add up all your whole numbers, and then get your total score there for the left antler. Let me know what you come up with. All right, and you should have gotten 50 1/8 if I can write. 50 1/8 should be your total for the left antler. Okay, 50 1/8. All right, last couple steps here. You're going to take your score per side, your 48 1/8, and add it to your 50 1/8 to get your total inches of antler right here. Okay, so let's do our eighths first. 1/8 plus 1/8 is 2/8. Okay, and then 48 plus 50 is 98. So we have 98 and 2/8 right there. Okay, and then we've got our 17 0/8 for our inside spread from earlier. Our very last step is we have to add this 17 0/8 from our inside spread from earlier to this 98 2/8. And that'll give us our total score. So 2/8 plus 0/8, pretty easy, is 2/8. And then our whole number, 98 plus 17, gives us what? 115. So our total score for this deer rack is 115 2/8. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, what about the deductions? Why don't you minus your side-to-side differences? With Buckmaster scoring system, you do not do that. You give the credit to what the deer actually grew. You don't take any deductions. Makes it a lot simpler to teach, makes it a lot simpler to get the hang of it. You don't have to worry about deductions. Besides, net scores, everybody says nets for fishing. I would tend to agree. Give the buck credit to what he grew. So this rack scored 115 2/8. Okay, so now I can say, not that this is just a 9-point, but it is a 115-inch 9-point approximately. Okay, so that gives somebody a much better idea of how big that buck actually was. All right, and the last thing I'm going to leave you with today is I'm going to give you some examples of score sheets. If you don't have any deer antlers at home that you can score, you can at least do the math portion. So I'm going to bring up a couple pictures of different score sheets. It's got everything filled in except for the answers. And all you got to do is figure out your side-to-side totals, add those two together, and then add your inside spread in at the end and get your total scores for those deer antlers. So have fun and enjoy. All right, guys, that's pretty much all I have. If you got any questions, comment below, and I'll try and help you out. Try this at home. If you got a rack at home that's up on the wall, whatever, just have your parents help you, and see if you can score them. See if you can get all your math done and everything added up and all the scores taken care of. And I'd like to see what you guys got. So that's pretty much all I have, and thanks for watching. We'll see you guys tomorrow.